So welcome, Jennifer. You have this interesting combination of both having studied the psychology of cancer. So you are a psycho-oncologist.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you've had your own personal experience of your son having cancer, which I think came after. So tell us just a little bit about that experience, like how those two worlds collided for you.
Yeah. So, yeah, as you said, I'm a psychologist, and I'm a psychologist that specializes in helping people with cancer. And most of my career, I'm a long-time act therapist. I've been an act therapist since, I don't know, I was born that way. Most people aren't. Most people kind of
Yeah, I was
come
born
to
that way
that.
too. I was like native
Yeah.
therapy language.
It's an
Well,
unusual,
yeah,
yeah.
you
So
went
I
to Steve Hayes.
studied with Steve Hayes for from like childhood practically.
Hmm.
And then really was drawn to medically sick people, um and really kind of wandered into cancer and never left. Just loved that work, that it felt so rich and so meaningful. Um and I just felt like I could, what I had to offer was really helpful in that space, and worked in oncology forever. And then, actually, while I was working in oncology, my husband first got cancer. As happens if we live long enough, everybody runs into tough stuff. And my husband was diagnosed with a really rough kind of cancer. And it's actually a little bit funny. Like, I mean, it's not something I should be laughing about, but I went to my manager in the clinic I was working in. I was working in an oncology clinic when my husband was first diagnosed. And I said, my husband was just diagnosed. I don't think I'm going to be able to talk about cancer while my husband is kind of going through this. And she was like, of course, like, just can you see your patients today? And then we'll, kind of sort it out. And I saw my patients, and it turned out it was fine. Like, there was something about it that I felt so helpless about his cancer and so stuck and afraid about what was going on with him. We had little kids at the time. Our kids were 9 and 11 when my husband was diagnosed. And I had so much helplessness and fear and uncertainty about what was going on with him that going to work and like being able to be helpful with somebody else
Hmm.
felt good. And so I went back to my manager and said, actually, I think I'm going to be okay. And I kept seeing patients throughout his treatment and beyond. And his whole process was many years ago now, and he's fine and is doing well. And we got
What
through
kind
that.
of
It was
treatment did he receive? What did he
He
go?
had a type of head and neck cancer, so he had tonsil cancer,
Hmm.
and that treatment is radiation with chemo at the same time,
Hmm.
which increases kind of the painfulness of radiation.
Yeah.
Um, and in his kind of tonsil area, of course, and
Mhm.
so it was extremely rough
Yeah.
treatment. It's a really hard treatment for people to do.
Yeah. And you have
Um,
two little ones at home, and then you're going into the office.
Yeah,
And
nobody was giving me any prizes for handling it very well.
even just that word handling it, as if you're supposed to handle the immensity of something like this and put it in some box in some perfect way. There's no
Yeah,
handling of that.
yeah, yeah.
So I'm going to slow you down.
Yes.
You learned from Steve Hayes. I learned from Kelly Wilson. They're a good balance. So Steve Hayes gets into the head, but I think Kelly Wilson reminds us to slow down because what you said there, and we're going to talk about your child too, but what you said there feels really important, foundationally important, is that we come up against something like this that's so big, so massive, and our first instinct is, I can't, quote, handle it. And you go to your supervisor and you're like, this is too much. But then watch what you did as you showed up. What happened for you during that time as a young mom? What truths did you learn for yourself?
I think I learned a lot in that process. And it's tough because, on one hand, what I know about working with people with cancer it was a little bit interfering
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning for me.
Mm-hmm.
My knowledge of kind of, what to do or what, might help was a little bit interfering for us in the beginning.
For you
And
personally,
for me
you
personally,
knew all this psychology and now you're in it and
yeah.
you're like, ugh,
Well,
yeah,
that it was tempting in the very beginning for me to go to a pretty intellectual space.
yeah.
And my husband in some ways wanted that. Like he wanted kind of concrete, as we do when we're really
Mhm.
terrified. We kind of want, he's a smart man. He wanted some things to do. And, I think what very quickly became apparent, like within, hours or days, was we just had to be the couple that we are. We had to, like, it was really important that I be a wife and not try to help him, which was really tough in the beginning for me. Is that, like it, it was, I was so afraid and so uncertain and felt so helpless that the repertoire of let me do something felt really loud at first for me. And pretty quickly we got to a space where we found a balance of that I could be a wife and sometimes just, this might sound strange, but like literally kind of lay on the top of him, clothed,
Yeah.
so that it was 100% clear how present we were with each other, but without my wanting to
Mhm.
help getting in the way of that,
Mhm.
or, creating something that was more intellectual for
Mhm.
us.
Increase your surface area for each other.
Yeah,
It's like skin to skin, but like adult sex style, right? That
yeah,
there's that's the is the thing. I mean, like
yeah,
we know this with our babies. When we're uncertain, we grasp for the bullet points and we want the path and we want to know what to do. And
yeah,
because you're a psychologist, you had all those, and you're an act psychologist on top of it, so you could say all the metaphors and
yeah.
all
It's
the
about
talk.
avoid.
But this
Yeah,
feels much more um, experiential.
yeah. I
And when
just
you say
needed to
be the
shut
wife,
up a little bit.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, be the wife, that has a little bit of what is a wife? I mean, that's in my head goes there. Like, what do you mean by be
yeah,
the wife? But maybe that there's a definition in there for you of what that means.
yeah. For
Yeah.
me, that means like my husband and I have been together for a long time. There is something that is nonverbal that happens
Yeah.
with us that is about an incredibly long, deep connection.
Yeah.
That was, I just needed to shut up, lay down on him,
Yeah.
and kind of, go into this much more I've got you space that we are with each other. That is not, me providing coping strategies, which was really tempting at first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it is so tempting. And I think what if sort of what process you're alluding to is really the process of they would say transcendent self. But I think it's from other traditions or other perspectives, it's the process of stepping into the great mystery, believing in the loving awareness, letting the love that holds both of you. So it's like you're lying on top of your husband, but then you're also in a field, an
Yeah.
energetic field. And it's hard to be in that energetic field when you're in your head or when you're fighting it. And probably for your husband, the thing that he craved most was just that presence, that loving presence, which is in act, but it's in so many of our wisdom traditions
Yeah.
of this bigger self, this wiser self that kind of knows what to do.
Yeah.
Maybe that's your wife self, you could call her,
Yeah.
you
That's
know,
the wife.
the wise
Yeah.
wife.
And
Uh,
he is for me in a
yeah,
million different ways. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And that self shows up in the therapy space so much for us as therapists. It's like and then you can get pulled into the problem solving self, right? And both are
Right.
needed, right? There's a tremendous amount of problem solving and task completing when you're going through something like this. Okay, so we
Yeah.
slowed it down,
Yeah.
and then let's move forward. So you continue on. He gets
So he
diagnosed.
recovered,
Yeah,
and yeah, we, very tentatively, as you do after cancer, kind of went back to our life with, you know, a lot of extra stuff added in for our family. Some of it, most of it's amazing and wonderful, about kind of knowing how we're loved and knowing what we can get through and some hard stuff too.
Were
And
you
then,
worried about your kids and their like their fear of their dad being sick or that like how did you navigate that? Like telling them that he had cancer. Cancer is such a loaded word.
yeah,
Cancer is such a loaded word.
such a
It's like the
little
word
word.
fat. It's like
Yeah, you
you know,
can't.
there's the
Yeah,
actual definition of
yeah,
fat, and then there's the stigma of fat, right? So there's actual
right.
definition of cancer, which can mean many things, but
Yeah,
you know, the multiplication of cells, and then there's the load that you
yeah,
fear our kids would have, or the stigma that we have. It's even used in the vernacular.
yeah. And luckily, they were young enough that a lot of the stigma of that word didn't have the same punch for them.
Yeah,
Some
that
of
makes
it
sense.
did. I mean, they knew what it was,
Uh-huh.
but they didn't have the history with the word that adults have.
Yeah.
And because, that was one advantage to the job that I have is that I knew kind of what the best outcomes generally for kids generally
Mhm.
is kind of honest information that's developmentally appropriate. And so that's what we encourage people who come into our clinic to do when they have kids is kind of talk about it in ways that are developmentally appropriate for kids. That dad was gonna, have to get some medicine and that was gonna have some effects on him. Um, and so the I was very worried about my kids. I think that's a standard state a little bit for me.
Mhm.
I like to worry about my kids.
Who's not worried
Apparently,
about their kids?
it's my hobby is worrying
Well,
about my kids,
if you're not worried about your kids, you don't love your kids. Let's just say that. There's
right?
some degree of healthy worry
Yeah.
because they're like the
So
most important thing on the planet.
yeah,
You. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
and they did great. I mean, we had a lot of things in place to keep their lives pretty normal as he went through that, as we went through that.
mhm.
And we gave them opportunities to talk about what was going on for them when they wanted them. Mostly they didn't want them. And mostly they, as kids do, they were extremely resilient.
Yeah.
I will say they handled it differently. I have two kids.
Mhm.
I have a daughter who's 2 years older than her brother. And, my daughter needed really different things than my son needed. And there's a fabulous camp that's called Camp Kesem that
Oh,
is
yeah.
have you heard of
Yeah,
this?
yeah, yeah. I had a client who worked there. Yeah,
Yeah.
heard all great things about Camp
Oh,
Kesem.
Camp
Yeah.
Kesem is I will spend my life advertising Camp Kesem.
Yes.
It's an amazing resource. It's a camp for kids who've had a parent who had cancer.
Mhm.
And the camp is basically just like a week of, the way they describe it is like it's a week of saying yes
Mm.
to kids who are going through that and beyond. So the wonderful thing about the camp is that the kids, once you've had that experience, you get to go to this camp for the rest of your childhood for a
Yeah,
week every summer.
yeah.
And my daughter loved it. Like
Oh.
just
She was
really,
9? She the 9-year-old?
she was 11.
She was the 11-year-old? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's an awkward age, and so I
Right.
don't know that she loved every moment of it in the beginning, but
Yeah.
she kept going and loved it, and my son really did not love it. He was, like,
Sure.
very, very upset about having to go, about how and, it ended up working out for both of them. My daughter's still very involved. She's a college student now. She's very involved in the chapter at her college, and
Mm.
she is a counselor that, like, kind of brings a lot of love and joy to kids that are sort of there for the camp. So,
So rad. So she's a counselor now at the very camp that she wow, that's just phenomenal.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and loves it
Great.
and is just very fed by it.
Mhm.
And, we tried hard to kind of pay attention to what each of them needed and, who knows? Like, I think you do your best you can as a parent and kinda cross your fingers a little bit. And they both kind of recovered. Our whole family sort of, got back to normal, I guess, sort of
Yeah.
eventually within and I don't know, a few years. And then, 5 years after that, my son was diagnosed with, B-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is a very treatable type of childhood cancer. And he was diagnosed when he was 14. And his treatment was quite a bit more extensive than my husband's. And so it was a much bigger kind of lift for our family. And interestingly, I went back on the day we found out about my son's cancer. I went back to my manager and said, I don't know. I'm in this situation again.
Mhm.
Don't know what's going to happen, but we'll see how it goes. And I saw one patient and canceled the rest of the day and went to my manager and said, I can't do it.
Yeah.
It's a whole different animal. So I think that's sort of the metaphor for what the kind of difference between the two cancers in our family were for me.
To have very different experiences, but have it be the same content, right? That
Yeah.
it's so idiographic, it's so and so contextual and so unique to this relationship and this time in your life. And you'd already, I mean, there's also another layer of you'd already been through this. So you
Yeah.
kind of knew how gnarly it was going to be. And now it's your kid.
Yeah, it was crazy
Like,
though, because
yeah,
I went to him and I was like, okay, so we went through this with dad. We sort
yeah.
of know what to expect. And they treat pediatric cancers and particularly blood cancers very differently
Mm-hmm.
than what my husband had. And so all of our expectations of what it would look like were just so different.
Yeah.
And, it's a little bit like what I said with my two kids. Like,
Right.
they, you don't step in the same stream twice. We've already
Yeah.
been through this. And also, they're different people. The relationship is very different between spouse and mom, and very much, much, much more difficult to hear that about your child.
And that just that drive to protect them from any kind of pain, any kind of suffering, and
Yeah.
know that they're in it. So tell me a little bit about your process through that, your different version of lying flat next to them. I imagine you, because you kind of found the thing with your husband, but I
Yeah.
imagine you found some things with your son that were unhelpful and things that you found with him that were helpful, both for him and for you.
Yeah. Well, he was 14 when he was diagnosed.
Yeah.
And uh, when from the beginning, like, he hadn't been feeling well. His pediatrician, who I will love until my dying day, said like a couple days into intermittent fever, um, they had tried antibiotics and the fever had come back. And this pediatrician, just like, just was like, you know what? Let's just get a blood draw. And my son was afraid of needles. Deathly afraid of needles. Really, just did not love needles. And 14, so he's trying to be tough, but he was like super frightened. And we had gone to get his blood draw, and I saw the results in his chart. I think they accidentally released them into his chart. And because I had worked in cancer for so long, I saw the blood results and realized what could be happening. I'm not a doctor, so I knew that there was lots of things that I didn't know what else could be happening, but I knew one of the things that could be happening. And so I called and asked to talk to the pediatrician on call. And they immediately said, you need to come in to the
Mhm.
hospital and pack a bag. And my son, when we got there, the pediatrician pulled me into the hallway and said, one of the things that this could be is leukemia, and here's the other things that it could be. And my son, I came back into his room, and he said, no more hallway conversations.
Huh.
If this is going to be about me, then I want to be in the conversations. And so then I had this tummy drop moment of like, I don't want to tell my 14-year-old son, because now he knows what cancer is, unlike when he was 9.
Mhm.
Now he knows. And so, so I think he and I sort of learned right away how we were going to do this together, in not together in the sense that any of the awful stuff that was happening to him was happening to me, but that I was going to be right next to him. I guess
Mhm.
that's the metaphorical laying on top of it that I did with
Mhm.
my husband. Like, I just my thought was, this is an overwhelming amount of things to cope with, and I can't imagine having to cope with it by myself. And so I will be lockstep with him as much as I can. And he had chemo for 2.5 years. He had, I think we counted, he and I counted once, and I think it was like 115 infusions of chemo or infusions of some sort. And yeah, I think the big principle for us was like, you know, as much as you can be supported from the outside for this, then we're going to do this as a family and we're going to do this together. And for me, individually, it was a lot of present moment,
Mhm.
like just literally checking, where is he right now? In fact, we're going through a scare of something right now. And literally today, I had the thought, like, okay, right now he's in first period and he's fine. And he's probably not paying close enough attention. And he's like sometimes 100 times a day, like, where is he right now? What is actually here for me to be coping with? What do I need to, what do I need to show up for really versus what is my mind telling me I need to show up for?
Mhm.
They're very different things.
Mhm. Yeah, that X marks the spot of now can be super helpful because there's so much outside of now that's really scary.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
like conceptual,
yeah, and
because
conceptual.
everything that was happening, I every day was like, well, right now he's upstairs playing video games, which I
Right.
have my own different reaction to, or he's, doing his homework, or he's sitting on the sofa.
Yeah. And there's also more to him than cancer, right?
Yeah.
He's a kid, he's a teenager now, he's going to
Yeah.
school, he's got all the things.
Yeah.
Um, so not letting that dominate his whole experience either, I imagine. But that was, I mean, such a brave thing for him to ask for, that he really wanted in on it. Like he really wanted to know. And I imagine that's very idiographic too. Like everyone may have a different need around that. Like I kind of don't want to know,
Yeah.
tell me what to do in terms of the treatment and keep me. So he was directly asking you to do something that was really hard to do as a parent. And then you had to muster up the motivation, the love for him to do the hard thing, like endure what's hard to endure.
We talk about this as kind of a continuum of kind of what helps you cope with things like a medical illness, and the range. I don't know who to attribute these words to, but the range of what we call them is people who monitor, or high monitors are people who cope best with lots of information, and blunters are people who cope best with, kind of trusting their doctor and not immersing themselves in the details. And he was definitely a monitor, and he wanted in on those conversations. And there were some times in the course of the treatment where um, things were really not looking great, and we had scary information that came in, and it was really tough to bring that information to him. And we had promised.
Yeah. So what did you do internally when you're doing that? Like when you're bringing the information to him, what's going on inside of you? How are you using all the skills that you've got to to do it?
Well, I mean, I think again, it is like in this moment, the sum total of what is happening is that I am feeling a level of terror and helplessness and uncertainty and despair. Knowing what is showing up for me, mostly in my body for me, but like what is present, and really knowing who I want to be as a mom. Like this, there's very little that helps clarify how you want to show up to hard things with your kids, like going through something like this. And for me, like he asked me to be honest with him and to not protect him from the information. And even though that was much more difficult for me, I think when those really tough moments showed up, like we, for us to be in this together, we had to be genuine with him.
There's something
Yeah.
about um, there's something about what we want to do, how we want to give, how we want to take care of someone, and it sometimes isn't actually what they need from you.
Right.
And so we have to listen. Like,
Right.
what is it that he's saying he actually needs? And it may be different from what you want to give. So,
Yep. And it would have been
yeah,
different if he had been 8.
yeah,
Like he was making decisions. And I know him well and knew at the moment what how I could talk about it in a way that was developmentally appropriate for him, but also like that he could be trusted. I think if he had been a different kid or a different age or a different stage, like maybe it would have been different. But like, you know your kids.
yeah.
You connect to them as who they are over and over and over. And that process kind of breeds a level of trust, I think, or it did for us. And he and I spent, when they say there's upsides, I don't know, but, he spent way more time with his mom than a 14-year-old normally spends with his
Sure,
mom.
sure.
It's,
Yeah, actually, I mean, I'm super close to my mom now, and it's because of having spent a lot of time with her when I was 14 and having my own experience of not being well, and like my mom had to
oh,
be by my side for like
oh,
2 years straight. So but now we're so close because of it.
right.
So but tell me about the Unwise efforts, right? So I don't want to paint the picture that you're like this perfect psychologist that had
That
all
would
this hard
be,
stuff and you just rose to the occasion. Like
that
there's
would be
got to
very
be Unwise
inaccurate.
efforts, and then there's also got to be. I also want to talk about right now how you work with what's happening right now. But Unwise efforts, what does that look like, or what did it look like for you?
It's interesting because I think for me, maybe because I specialize in cancer and particularly in helping people really at the end of their lives,
Mhm.
I have, um, when you work with grief and dying and very like brainstem level fear that is not a distortion, but is
It's real.
genuine, like you're going to die soon. Um, I work with people a lot to kind of intentionally increase their flexibility around when they're focused on kind of being present to that and when they're taking a break from it. I think that's maybe just one of the things that's part of working with this population is that, you don't necessarily, some people probably can face the end of their life and meditate all day and stay open and present to all of that, but it's really rare. And so most people kind of need to kind of come in and out of it a
You need to
little
go play
bit.
some video games if you're a
Yeah.
14-year-old boy.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of the Unwise effort, I mean, there's plenty of moments. My kids can tell lots of funny stories about, especially when their dad had cancer, about me like completely losing it in the car when somebody wouldn't put their seatbelt on. Or like they have
Yeah.
lots of very funny stories about kind of what it looks like when like my top blows off. Um, but I think mostly especially through my sons because it was so long and a lot of it was in the hospital and so you're not sleeping and um a lot of the unway I don't even know like a lot of it for me was actually just like doing things that reading a romance novel or like watching bad TV with my daughter or like so much of like very intentionally doing something that was kind of what we call in psycho-oncology, like low cognitive load coping,
Mhm.
like so
That's
much.
wise effort, you're saying.
Yeah,
That's not unwise effort. You need the low cognitive load. You need the romance
you
novel. That's
do,
different.
you do. But
Yeah.
I mean, like, I think that's, I would say that every single day I have a very long meditation practice, and every single day for I don't even know how long, more years than he was in treatment. My morning sit involved tears,
Yeah.
like just the terror of that bubbling up as soon as I'm quiet. So I imagine a lot of what was going on underneath the surface of that. And, you know, you, as we do, moms push through
Mhm.
and handle and worry. And then I would sit down every morning and just like,
Come
like
on, sobbing
not even
meditation.
cope, just cry,
It's sobbing
just
meditation. It's good. Yeah. So this is where ACT goes wrong is when we start to believe that it's experiential avoidance if we're like checking out and, watching a show when that we need to be in these like meaningful, meditative,
yeah,
open, expansive states all the time. That's actually a regulation, an important regulation to just let
right,
yourself go a little bit, let yourself be. Experiential avoidance is when you're doing that at a cost.
yeah,
You're
yeah.
not looking at the stuff or it's harming you or your family in some way. But it seems like that is part of the coping of it all.
It's very messy.
Yeah.
Like, that's not that I'm describing it now, a
Mhm.
couple of years later, like, but in the moments of it, it was a lot of like, my husband and I, because he had had cancer and I had like, you as a mom, you have a lot on your to-do list anyways. As a working mom, you have a lot on your to-do list. As a working mom with cancer, my to-do list was ridiculous. And so, I mean, working mom with a kid with cancer,
Yeah.
like we were scheduling long hospitalizations all the time. And my daughter was still in high school and needed a lot. Like this was happening for the second time in her family.
Mhm.
And while she was going through her own difficult phase of existence, and her mom was at the hospital all the time. And like my husband wanted to cope with it in some ways the way we had coped with his, which was that we go into our couple bubble and talk about the scariest thing that could happen and like, you know, kind of get psychologically, mentally ready for that. And I was like, mm-mm. Like I can't do
You were
that.
in get it done mode. You were like
I had a
inside.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
was
gotta
like,
get shit
I
done.
gotta go back
Yep.
to the hospital. I can't
Yeah. Yep.
be there. And
Mhm.
so we had a lot of like, okay, you need to get help for this part from this person, and I need to get help from this part from this person because like the way we wanted to support each other was like I was like, no, 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 could you just help me stay afloat?
Yeah.
And he was like, but what about what's happening? I
Yeah.
was like,
Well, this is important because this is an important another thing that we may wake up to when something big happens to our family is that it can't just be our family,
yeah,
that we need to find lots of supporters, that the network has to get bigger. And we can't get everything from our spouse. We can't get everything from our kid. We can't get everything from our parent. Like that
yeah,
these networks and the community aspect needs to get boosted.
yeah,
And sometimes we don't know that until
yeah,
something like this happens.
yeah. And I will say at the hospital I was at, I very quickly found some moms and would not have made it. I don't even know what it would have looked like if I
Yeah.
hadn't found some moms.
Yeah.
And to this day, those moms are, you know, like the for me, I know from working in cancer that this isn't the case for everybody, but for me, um, it really needed to be kind of shared
Yeah.
experience with people that were going through it and who were coping in the same way that I was or needed to cope in the same way that I was, which my husband was 100% going through it and coped
Mhm.
with it beautifully, but had a different way of coping with it than I did.
Mhm. What did he find for his support?
He has a couple of good friends who just were willing. I mean, it's hard because when your kid has cancer, people don't want to upset you. They don't want to
Right.
talk about it. They don't want, and it's a heavy subject.
They're uncomfortable with your
And so
discomfort. Yeah.
he was blessed with a couple of buddies who could do it, who
Mhm.
could what he really wanted to do. husband and I call it spelunking. Like he really wanted to like go down to like the deepest, darkest corners
Ooh,
and
I like
kind
your
of
husband. He's up my
he's
alley.
great.
I want to go down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
not if I'm like trying to get the dishes done and my kid's out the
Yeah.
door and yeah,
Not if,
gotta
yeah,
go to the
like
hospital.
he
Yeah.
really wanted to do some spelunking. So,
Oh.
and he found he had some great friends to spelunk with. And what we know from, you know, the world of coping with cancer literature is that it's never one thing. Like the you're so dependent on the context. You're so dependent on what phase of treatment you're in and what the coping tasks are so specific to the part of cancer and treatment that you're in that what you have to do to cope while you're waiting to start treatment, for instance, is
Hmm.
very different than what you have to do to cope with side effects of treatment or waiting for a scan or finishing treatment and then being afraid it's going to come back or finding out that you don't get to finish treatment and that this is a lifelong condition for you. And we know that the sort of how we support people in those various stages is really different. And that certainly was the case in our family too.
Yeah. So thank goodness you were born into psychological flexibility from the beginning with your training, because that's all of that is like, how are we flexible enough to change and change again and change again over and over again, lose our footing so many times,
Yeah.
find our footing, lose our footing. Yeah.
Yeah. I've had the chance lately to tell Steve Hayes a couple times, like, I just don't, I'm so grateful that whatever weird set of
Yeah.
things happened that like not in, I mean, not just in terms of my career and my professional development, but like in terms of my life. I'm so glad that I got to I got to face these things in the way that I was able to face them. Not because I did it well necessarily, but because it I had I knew kind of where my compass was as I went through it. I knew what I what was available. Again, I took breaks from it all the time, but I knew kind of how I wanted to show up
Mhm.
on my best day because whatever weird set of circumstances made me meet Steve Hayes.
Yeah. Well, I believe that we're just in training, we're just in constant training for life,
Yeah,
and we can rely on all of the training that we've received. Sometimes it's academic training, but sometimes it's life experience training. I mean, your
yeah,
son had a very early training with his dad,
yeah,
and I wouldn't wish that on any kid to go
yeah,
through cancer twice the way that he did. But and I do want to I want to ask you two more as we're starting to wrap up. Two more questions. One is related to you and your psychologist hat, because you've been in such a personal hat, and I don't want to lose the chance to hear from your academic wise self. I mean, you've written papers on this, you've written books on psychological flexibility, you've done lots of workshops and trainings, and when you put your um, cancer psychologist hat on, what are the big main messages that you're working with people on to help them move through this as flexibly as possible?
yeah. I would say like my top three things like I want people to get from working with me or coming in contact with my work. One is values is in the day that you're in. Like when we talk about values in ACT, we tend to um, kind of it can be a little bit broad in how we think and talk about it for very good reasons. But a lot of times, the people that I work with um, get trapped into a state of it must be very meaningful because I'm about to die, or I must do this before I die, or I must be this, have this outcome before I die. Um, and that shows up even with pretty treatable forms of cancer because people, as we've been talking about, the word cancer makes people feel like they're going to die. Um, and so, like, really helping people shift to showing up in the day that they're in a way that they feel proud about or will be kind of, you know, moving towards something that feels meaningful for them. I've literally seen people like purposefully do something connected to their values on the last day of their life. Like just that there's something so powerful about that not needing to be a big project
Mm-hmm.
for people that are in this process. So that's one. The second, kind of what I said with my son, like back to this moment that you're actually in, because the way that we develop language and kind of use our brains involves the properties of dying to be here in the present when we are thinking about dying. And so we want to help people really see what is in the present, really coming back and seeing what is conceptual. And, because I could be busy like coping with my son having cancer while he's upstairs playing video games. And I don't need to cope with my son possibly dying or any such thing outside of the fear I have about it, which is what is actually here. And then I think the third thing is being able to kind of come in and out as I need to. That intentional coming in and out is this really rich, beautiful way to like be able to do the work when the context is there to do the work, to show up to what's here, and to do some exposure around that when we need to. And then like also be able to, lots of times values themselves are a way of stepping out of feelings. And so use them. We talk about this in grief all the time of, there's sort of loss oriented coping where you're thinking about the other person and I mean the person you've lost and you're really feeling the feelings. And then there's what's called restoration focused coping where you're kind of learning to pay the bills because your partner always paid the bills and so kind of making that a little bit more intentional is something that we really want people who are facing something brainstem level scary, I am going to die or I could die, to be able to do.
It's beautiful. And then now back with your personal hat back on right before we got on. You mentioned even as we were talking, there's some additional uncertainty that you're facing now.
Yeah.
So, how do you want to step into that?
Um, I think that the reality for most people who go through something like this, and certainly for myself, with both my husband and my son, although my son more acutely in some days these days, um, I think you're always in this process. Like you don't finish cancer treatment and stop being terrified or helpless or uncertain. That those feelings, like small things, pop up from time to time that will pull you into that terror again. And, my son is graduating from high school in 3 weeks and just accepted to go away to college a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And so all of it is here for me and always will be because the vulnerability that I feel about him being out in the world and him, he pediatric cancer has a long window before they stop being worried about you medically. And so as he goes out into the world, like I have to have that vulnerability. Oh, are you having a feeling?
Yeah. The size of your love is the size of your vulnerability.
Yeah.
And so it's big.
Yeah.
And yeah. Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing all of that, all of it today. So open and There's so much in there that we could bullet point out, but just the experience of hearing you talk about your story, but then the wisdom underneath your story, all rooted in like a deep academic understanding of the processes underneath this. And for those that, as I mentioned before, for those that want to learn from Jennifer, she has a lot of resources. She has Stop Avoiding Stuff. Such a good name. Stop Avoiding Stuff with Matt.
I will say they wanted to have it say Stop Avoiding Shit. I don't know if I can say that on here.
Stop Avoiding Stuff. I think Stop Avoiding Stuff is better because it's just like stuff. Some of it's not shit. Some of it's just like stuff.
Yeah.
So Stop Avoiding Stuff.
It's a very short chapters, just like little bite-sized nuggets of in a tiny, tiny book.
Or maybe in like a waiting room while you're waiting to go see a doctor, right? So sometimes we need it to be very small. And then you have a new workbook out with Matt Boone, who's another phenomenal psychologist in the area of ACT, the Acceptance and Commitment Therapy Workbook.
He's a social worker, but yes.
Social worker.
And he is also an author on the other one with Lisa Coyne.
Yeah, with Lisa Coyne. These are all like greatest people. So you're all getting together. How fun to write books with them. Yeah. So those are great resources for folks that want to know the nuts and bolts of all the stuff that you're practicing and doing in your life and work through it for themselves. And it's just been an honor and delight to spend the hour with you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. This has just been a delightful space to talk about all this stuff, and I'm so grateful.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Wise Effort podcast. Wise Effort is about you taking your energy and putting it in the places that matter most to you. And when you do so, you'll get to savor the good of your life along the way. If you would like to become a member of the Wise Effort podcast, go to wiseeffort.com. And if you like this episode and think it would be helpful to somebody, please leave a review over at Podchaser. I would like to thank my team, my partner in all things, including the producer of this podcast, Gregg, Ashley Hyatt, the podcast manager, and thank you to Ben Gold at Bell & Branch for our music. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and it's not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatments.